So now we get to the last philosopher of significance that Truman addresses, William Reich. And it's really, he calls this where Marx meets Freud. And what Reich does is he blends the two. He blends the two. So we'll go ahead and start reading about him at the top of page 80. So flip in your books to page 80. And let's look at the top paragraph, because where we are in history is really important. He's right in between World War I, 1917 to 1919-ish, and World War II. But then he's living in Germany in the rise of Hitler. The rise of Hitler. So, Mitch, could I ask you to read the very top paragraph there at page 80, but the attempted workers' revolution of 1919. Nice and loud. Perfect, thank you. And I should have had him start a little bit earlier. It says, most significantly for the narrative were the events in Germany after World War I. On paper, so this is 1919-ish, on paper it should have been ripe for a Marxist revolution. Russia had just had that revolution, 1917. They had overthrown their monarchical structure. They'd killed the royalty or put them in exile. And now Lenin was in charge. Germany, in their minds, in these philosophers' minds, should have been next, but they were not. So they're trying to explain this. Now, Reich is a Marxist. He believes that the people should rise up and that they should govern. But they're also looking at this right-hand turn, they call it right-hand, into National Socialist Nazis, basically, led by Hitler. Now, Reich, studying under Freud, who believes in the Freudian construct, but also believes in this revolution that needs to happen and to set the workers free, he believes in that too. He's considered too radical even for Freud. That's the next guy we're dealing with. So he's going to try to explain this shift from all of the workers having the rights in their hands and taking over to this utopian vision, to all of the workers giving it all to a single man, an authoritarian structure, Hitler. That's where we're headed. So where does this go? How does this work? Let's do, let's see, Mr. Capone. If you could look at page 81, and let's read this paragraph. Reich is a Marxist, so when he examines.
Got it.
That one.
Reich is a Marxist. When he examines the sexual code of his day, he is particularly sensitive to what he sees as the class interests that are protected or reinforced by sexual codes. In short, he views them as maintaining not simply civilization in general, but specifically the kind of bourgeois, middle-class, capitalist culture that German life embodies. In 1930s Germany, Reich sees these codes as reinforcing an institution that serves to cultivate a mindset with a tendency to follow authoritarian leadership figures.
You can pause there. And then, Alan, if you could stand up and read the bottom paragraph of 81 where Truman translates for us. He says, in plain English. And then just keep going to the top of 82, and I'll stop you after the quote.
In plain English, the sexual morality of Reich's day is designed to reinforce the structure and authority of the traditional family. The social function of the traditional family is to raise children who are instinctively obedient to strong, authoritative,
Okay, so pause there real quick. Stay with me, Alan. This is a key pivot. This is a key pivot because what Reich is doing is he's saying, oh, it's the family structure in Germany that is so strong, this father figure structure in Germany that is so... The right answer is that everybody has to stand up in a Marxist way and own the fruits of production and then be a unified whole in this utopian vision. But everybody instead went to this authoritarian guy. He identifies the problem as the family, specifically a family led by a strong father figure. And he says that's what's toxic. This idea of a family with a father who is the head of the household is wrong. Remember, ethics. It's not about this is good for you, this is good for me. It's about what's right and what's wrong. His vision for society is that Marxist view. It's got to rebel. It's got to break free. But it's the authoritarian structure, specifically in the family, specifically fathers, that's the problem. And so because we have patriarchal families, they will then adhere to or move towards an authoritarian political structure led by a single man, like Hitler. Go ahead.
Morality's aim is to produce acquiescence with
Sorry, this is the quote. This is the quote for those of you that don't have a book. I'm sorry. So now this is Reich himself speaking with this quote. Go ahead. Can you start again? Sorry.
Morality's aim is to produce acquiescence of the two, despite discredit and humiliation, are adjusted to the authoritarian order. Thus, the family is the authoritative state manager to which the child must learn to adapt himself as a preparation for the general social adjustment required of him later.
Perfect. Thank you. So you can see what Reich is saying there. And remember, his view is a mix of Freudian and Marxist. So he sees this family unit required by the sexual codes of the day. He sees that. And he says because of that, then you have this strong male patriarch in the family, which then that person's job is to make everyone else subservient to himself in that family structure, and that's what feeds a societal structure that makes people willing to acquiesce to authoritarian dictators. You see how that flows? Which means then, and this is the key piece for us, because remember, as we go forward, we're trying to trace these various streams of thought that are still in our culture today, the problem is fathers. And the problem is traditional, quote unquote, patriarchal, father-led families. That's what needs to be exploded in order for society as a whole to mature and to have that revolution and realize itself. And we see that all over the place today. Let's see.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Do you think that they see the fatherless society, these are men, as the enemy, or is it they are just too lazy to be a good father, and therefore it's easy to acquiesce that to someone else?
Are you talking about the philosophers?
Yeah, these philosophers, it's easier to say you don't need to be a father because I'm not, because I'm too lazy to do it.
Yeah. So the question is, do you think that these philosophers, so I'm assuming you mean Nietzsche, Reich, Freud, all these folks, do they see the fatherless families as, is this really true? Do they believe it? Or is it just because they're too lazy to do it themselves? Is that what you're asking? Yeah. Can't speak for them, of course. My guess is they're true believers. Now, what's interesting is that these guys are nobodies. Nobody is listening to them. But they are true zealots, I think. They really believe this stuff. Freud was largely ostracized in his lifetime, and then he died hiding from the Nazis in the 30s. You just go down Rousseau died. Almost nobody knew him. Marx died. Nobody knew him. Even at his funeral, his buddy and funder, the guy that gave him money, Engels, said, nobody knows who this guy is, but in a generation, everybody will be talking about it, which turned out to be true. But he died mid-1800s. Everything happened 1917-ish. So all of these men were basically nobodies, but they were extreme ideologues, I think, but I can't say that for sure. And they were also horrible fathers. Yes, you can see that as well. But that's where they're going. So how do we figure out society? And these are their different theories. Now it's forming these various strains that weave together to a strong rope by the time we get to us. Let's keep going on 82, bottom paragraph. Let's do that. Adam, could I ask you to read that? 82, bottom paragraph here. We can see this in the proposals Reich makes, and then you'll stop there. Pause there. Do you see the mixing? The sexual Freud revolution, Marx. Freud was against revolution. He said the society had to be maintained because if not, chaos would ensue because of sexual promiscuity. Marx was for revolution, but he didn't think the sex thing, it was economics and political. So he's blending the two. And his book is called The Sexual Revolution, which was the 1930s, not the 1960s. We'll get there. Go ahead.
Look, he makes the point that Freud was correct in seeing the role of sexual repression as the basis for civilization, but incorrect in generalizing this to all cultures and not simply that of societies built around the patriarchal family. Thus, revolution will involve the dismantling of the sexual codes on which the bourgeois family is built. Frank passage, Reich declares.
You could pause there. Let's go to the next paragraph, or 83, these paragraphs. The point is clear, and then of course.
The point is clear. Sexual codes must be shattered if human beings are to be truly free.
So pause there. Again, that's Freud and Marx. Human beings are to be free. Freud was never for that. It's the sexual codes that are the problem. Go ahead.
Those things that inhibit the free sexual expression, even of young children, are oppressive and prevent individuals from truly being themselves.
And then even of young children, remember Freud said that even infants had tendencies, which was wrong. But he said it, and he published it, and everybody started to believe it. Go ahead.
Of course, the question immediately rises of who exactly is going to facilitate this revolution in sexual codes if the family, and later the church, have a vested interest in maintaining the old oppressive standards of behavior.
So pause there. A lot in that sentence. Who's going to facilitate the revolution? Marx. In the sexual codes, Freud. If the family, patriarchal structure, that's Reich, and later the church, also Reich. So he's pointing to these two things, these two entities, have a vested interest in maintaining the old oppressive standards of behavior, the status quo. That's Marx. So again, to achieve societal actualization, you have to overthrow the current society. Go ahead.
The answer lies in the last sentence of the above quotation. Society will do so by promoting the sexual freedom and dealing severely with those who oppose it. In short, sex must become a pressing political issue in which the state takes a proactive interest. Reich writes this in the mid-30s. Not one who lives in the Western world today, no one who lives in the Western world today will find this statement to be anything less than prophetic. From teaching elementary school children about contraception and homosexuality onward, the state has arrogated to itself the policing of the education of children in sexual matters. And this is not a random development, but one predicated on an assumption about the relationship of sex to personhood.
Pause there. Thank you, Adam. That's perfect. This is a very rich paragraph, unfortunately, with a lot of truth we see today. So society, then, not government, not the church, is to become the enforcing tool of all of these new ideas. Now you think about today, society is on acceleration Fast forward with social media, because that allows society to function at speed and in a herd type of a mentality and force. And we'll get to that at the end of this chapter. But it's society that is meant to do this. And then what's important here is the last pieces. Teaching elementary school children about contraception, homosexuality, the state itself arrogating to itself the policing of the education and children. And we've been doing over the last 20, 30 years. And then certain countries around the world. So China actually enforced contraception on its people with the one-child policy, if you all remember that. They enforced that structurally. You were only allowed as a family to have one child, which says to you how much you can have and how much you can't. Now with modern technology, especially in light of declining populations, could a government enforce 5 children and 6 children and say you must have? Also with the technology that we have with, different ways to inseminate or different, artificial means, what have you, if there is if there's a government that's authoritarian, that's looking at its population and seeing things decline, what could they then seek to enforce? To fix it. So all of this from the 1930s, this idea that it's society itself that must feed itself, serve itself. Remember in Marx, everything is political because we're all depending on each other. So if all of a sudden the village ain't having enough babies, what do we need to do? We need to find a way to make more babies. Or if the village is having too many, we need to find a way to get rid of some. Or get rid of the old people. That's that Marxian view, where we're all dependent on each other. All right, so let's keep going, because this changes everything. So page 84. Let's read that first paragraph. Now we're going to get to the sexual revolution itself, what we call that in the 1960s. Aiden, can you read for me? Page 84. Can a book magically appear for Aiden somewhere? Lovely. Thank you, Mary. The first paragraph on page 84, the sexual revolution. It begins reflecting on Reich's thought.
Reflecting on Reich's thought is also helpful for understanding the nature of the sexual revolution that has now marked Western society for over half a century. To consider this, the transformation in sexual morality that has swept the West since the 1960s as something that involves merely the expansion of a range of legitimate sexual activities and expressions is really to miss the point. For example, the sexual revolution is not simply foundational to identity. That means identities are being suppressed or denied. The game, therefore, is not to change those principles or merely loosen them. It is to abolish them in their entirety.
Perfect. Thank you. So that paragraph right there. For the sexual revolution, the existence of any moral principles, what we used to call moral principles, right and wrong, has to be abolished. Now remember in Freud, this psychologizing of the individual, any and every impulse that you have is right. Morally and ethically right. Because you have them from infancy. You're made that way. So if it's morally and ethically right for you to have any of those impulses, then it's morally and ethically wrong for any society to suppress those influences. And that society that does that must be overthrown. The codes that would do that must be overthrown. Otherwise, people have no road to happiness. Yes? Mary asked the right question. Where's the limit on that? The key point is, and this is where we're going to get later, is it starts to eat itself. Remember we said this is all circular. You can only break out of so many different things, but eventually everybody's broken out of everything and you're just standing all by yourself in a forest somewhere, hypothetically, and then nothing's happening. Yes?
I was just going to ask, kind of through an American lens, right? Like
and bring us back to what? Something?
Something.
Okay. Travis's question was, at some point, speaking from an American context, at some point is there a counter-revolution that brings us back to some ought, something that we ought to be or ought to do or way that we ought to think? Is that correct? Yeah. Kind of had one in early November. Well, in a sense, yeah. I mean, non-political, right? Just think about the differences in perspectives between the two candidates. And that there was a swath of people that were still very much in this, but then there's a swath of people kicking back on this. And it has to do primarily, where we have that discussion more comfortably is where? The children. The children. That's where we are more comfortable having that discussion. Because, and this is what's interesting, what's unique about children isn't their innocency or their naivete or however you want to frame that. What's interesting is that children are under a that advisedly. The competition then was whose authority they're under. Are they under some kind of a national structure? Either an educational structure, governmental structure, whatever. Do those children belong to the state? Not individual states now, the governmental state, or do they belong to the individual families? And that was very much at issue, especially in some states, right? That was the battle. And it's in all our papers, and they're framing it largely the right way. But then you think about non-American cultures. And China is a great example, but you also think about the Middle Eastern cultures, some of them that way. Whose authority are those children under? And I think they've already made their statements, governmentally speaking. So those are great questions, great thoughts. Now we can continue to develop on this. The last piece that we need to make sure that we get, because infants from birth, supposedly, have these impulses, therefore they are born that way. And the next little speed bump is, oh, that means that's their identity. It's not how they act, it's who they are. It's not what they do, it's where they come from, because that's... So any imposition then becomes an imposition on the identity that I have, on who I am, not what I can do or even how I can think. It's who I can be. Now, interestingly enough, in American culture, what do we always say? You can be anything you want to be, but we don't mean it that way, right? That's never the way it's been meant. But if you are a person working the line at McDonald's, you can work your way all the way up and you can become a billionaire. And we've got examples of those guys and gals. It's awesome. And we say you can be that. There's all these different things. Work more, you kiss them or whatever you... Yeah, oh. Here, yeah. Stand up. The new heading here, the changing oppression, and this is why we're... The new heading here, the changing oppression, and this is why we're getting to the end of our philosophical discussion, because page 86 at the bottom, and then 87, oh, nice long section, Troy, you're so excited. You're down here, there, and you're going to read... No, yes, that's right, that paragraph, yeah. And I may stop you once or twice.
This is a critical point because it explicitly places the modern notion of the self, that of the psychologized individual at the center of the political struggle.
And why is that? And why is that? Because again, now we are no longer people doing things. This is who we are in our identity. It's who I'm meant to be. It's my purpose. It's my meaning. It's my fulfillment. It's my happiness. If I have the right, via the Constitution, and we're going to get there, to life, liberty, to do what I want, and the pursuit of happiness, even in the old sense, fulfillment, meaning, purpose, if that's in one of these letters out here that we don't even know, you have no right constitutionally to not allow me to fulfill what makes me happy. Do you guys see that? Now we're down to the individual, and it's all in their heads of what they think and feel. Go ahead.
Whereas in the 19th century, the big questions were those of economic inequality. By the 1930s, Reich sees them as shifting into the psychological domain.
So that's Freud and Marx. Go ahead.
We might say that the big question is now whether society will allow people to be themselves, in which Reich's mind is the same as, quote, give support and affirmation to individuals as they express their sexual desires in their sexual context.
Social context. Society.
Social context.
Yep.
But goes to shift in left-wing political priorities as clear.
The upper classes, right? The poor versus the rich. Go ahead. Repression. Go ahead.
Claiming that the struggle for the economic progress of the disadvantaged in the early 1970s. In the world we inhabit today bears more witness to the truth of this than either man could have anticipated. In the West, recognition of a variety of sexual and other identities.
Perfect. Thank you. Does that make sense? The flow? What we're seeing then is that a patriarchal, father-led family is the problem for true actualization. For society to get where it needs to go and to break free of the authoritarian structure, family structure has to change, because that's where the children get conditioned to submit to authority, which is the evil. That's the evil part. They're not being free to express, they're not being allowed to express all of who they are. And that's repression. It's repressing their identity. So until we can destroy that family structure, and again, now we're in the 1970s, until we can destroy that family structure and that father-led family structure, people can't actualize and the society can't come together in a Marxian revolution to where all men are free and happy. Yes, ma'am. Yes, she said, so basically it's society influencing the child now instead of that father and that family. And she said, and that's what's happening. Now that can happen, cartoons, social media, a lot of children's materials and literature that are recent and new. And remember, the big war was in schools, elementary schools, and the children's story hours and things like that. Oh no, we have to expand them, we have to teach them, we have to help them understand all these different things that they can be. Now is it starting to make sense? Like you see where they're going. They're going straight to the next generation. And then that's created that battle over whose kids are they? Whose kids are these? Now, a couple of key words in here. Let's get to the last paragraph, page 87, top of 88. Mike Long, could I ask you to read that for me? So page 87 at the bottom there, the term recognition is important here. Now, you guys will all recognize this because we just had this battle. Go right ahead.
The term recognition is important here. By recognition, I mean not simply the common sense notion of realizing that some claim to a particular identity exists. That is, say, David claims to be gay. Rather, I mean that society does not simply tolerate David's identity while not approving of it, but actually affirms, supports, and encourages it. In other words, it is not enough to say to David that society will allow him to behave as he wishes in private without fear of prosecution. That is more tolerance. Society must also affirm that his identity is as valid as that of anybody else, lest he feel marginalized through psychological oppression. This is a matter we'll discuss in chapter 6.
Chapter 6, right up there, those intellectual frameworks. So that was a lot. Back through this paragraph. It is not enough to merely recognize something. As a society, remember, Reich says it's society that enforces, and it's society that shifts. So if a society just says, oh, yeah, he says he's gay, okay. Oh, yeah, the sky is blue, okay. That's traditional recognition. But the problem that you have here is that's equated to toleration. So you can be that way in private. It doesn't mean I approve of it. Matter of fact, I don't. But if it's in the privacy of your own home, that's okay. And what was our military standard under Clinton, I think, and under Bush? What was it called? That's exactly what that is, toleration. But in the last, 3 years, we had a series of riots in this country, and what was silence? Silence was violence. So you see the shift? If you are merely silent, if you are merely tolerating, then that is violence toward me. Why? Because my identity is this. And if you're disapproving of my identity, then you're killing me. How does that work? And how does it get indoctrinated? We are to affirm, support, and encourage. What are the ways that we affirm, support, and encourage? We educate. We have nationally, and this is in all westernized countries, we have tests, standardized tests for our children at different levels in order to ensure that they're being properly educated. Well, who decides what's on the test and what content is being tested? We have religious institutions, but we have a lot of religious institutions. We don't have just one anymore because we had the Reformation in the 1500s. But for 1,500 years, we had one religious institution. Hate it, love it, all the different whatevers, yes, of course. But what religious institution are you part of now? There was a TV show somewhere, or something or other, and the daughter says, I think I'd like to explore the religion. And the mother says, okay, which one? That's a great question. Profound question. Because on any given street corner, even in a town like Denver, little tiny dinky town, you can find varieties of the Christian religion, you can find varieties of the Islamic religion, you can find varieties of Mormon religion, Jehovah's Witness, whatever. It's not monolithic and it's not easy. But in our world, we have educational institutions. Now, those educational institutions are bending towards validating, affirming, supporting, and encouraging all different types of identities. We have financial institutions, banks, stock market. We've had different initiatives forced onto corporations that are publicly traded on the stock market where they must engage in this behavior. Those are social behaviors. Those are not economic behaviors. You must engage in these behaviors. Legal. You can sue if you feel you're being discriminated against based on your identity. We've never done that before. Who says what your identity is? You do. So based on my identity, what I say it is today, what I've decided, I now have legal rights based on that. And I can enforce them against people and against corporations. Because if a corporation acts in a way against my identity and I perceive that as hostile, perceive it, just if I perceive it as hostile, there can be severe consequences and I can sue. Constitutional. This word, I want to say it's driving us nuts, but it's not. But this word, happiness, I have the constitutional right to pursue my happiness. Well, what's that? My purpose, my meaning, my joy, in whatever that initial happens to be, or whatever I dictate that it is today. All of that is affirming, supporting, and encouraging. Because we're not allowed to just tolerate. Yes, ma'am.
Our last Supreme Court justice refused to define a woman in her appearance. Is that hiding in her
So for those that didn't hear, our last Supreme Court justice, when she was being interviewed, refused to define a woman. Refused. So that's where we are. Now, I do think we're kind of bending backwards. I think the speed of this is remarkable. It's absolutely remarkable because it wasn't too long ago that we were here. Then we got to here, and now it feels like it's bending back a little bit in different ways. And we'll discuss that as we get further on down the chain here. But this is where it all comes from. This is where it all comes from. So these philosophers then are the roots. But just know that most of them died unknown, unread, etc. And for the most part, they're still unknown and unread. But the way that they impact society is not so much through their big, thick philosophy books, but through the little catchphrases, the little pieces that they've added to our social imaginary. Do you remember that phrase? It's the thing that forms our intuitions. The thing that forms our intuitions. And this is westernized world. The reason we can walk into a church and know that we don't light a cigarette. It's those little sensations, those things that we know because of our intuition. And it's built into us. Now what we're having to do, and this is interesting and in some ways encouraging, what we're having to do is go back and re-examine our intuitions and saying, wait a minute, where do those intuitions come from? And what are they based on? And is this the right thing to base an intuition off? Or is this the right thing to base? Or is this the right thing to base? And we're having that big discussion now, which is very similar to all of the heresies that have ever been throughout the church. Wait a minute. We believe that Jesus is God, but he was a man. But he was also God. That was a big discussion point. And Trinity. Wait, the word Trinity is not in the Bible. But we believe in the Trinity. And that was the 3rd century. Through about the 5th. So all of these things, they get attacked by different people. Pelagius, right? And these different heretics that come in and say, no, it's this way. No, it's this way. And then we get, how did that happen? Let's figure it out. Let's think it through. Let's work it through. Da, 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 da. And in some ways, even though all this sounds like a strange new world, it's actually the same process we've always gone through when we've had some truths that we haven't examined attacked. And then we have to think it through and say, okay, how do we think this through? Let's think it through. Let's come up with truth. And then let's decide and move forward. Which is what's always happened so far by God's grace in the church and in different societies. It doesn't mean it's easy. Doesn't mean it doesn't cause a lot of damage. It absolutely does. But it is a process that we've seen over and over again, which in that way can be taken to be very comforting. All right, we'll leave it there. Travis, can you close us in prayer, brother?